Welcome back to today's deep dive. I am so glad you are joining us because we have a really fascinating one today. Usually when we talk about waking up, there is this underlying expectation of this immediate, almost aggressive momentum.
Oh, absolutely.
Like you open your eyes, the alarm is just blaring, and you are instantly thrust into the machinery of the day. You are calculating commute times. You are mentally drafting emails. Just you are already bracing for impact.
Right. It is like we have built this entire modern culture around the idea that the transition from unconsciousness to active duty is just a mechanical switch that gets flipped.
Yeah, asleep and then instantly producing.
Exactly. And I mean, that expectation is completely divorced from human biology.
Yeah.
We operate under this collective illusion that the moment our eyes open, we just owe the world our immediate attention.
Which is wild when you actually think about it.
It is. Physiologically, the brain does not boot up like a computer. It requires the staging sequence. So when we force that aggressive momentum, we are essentially redlining an engine before the oil has had a chance to circulate.
Oh, that is a great way to put it.
Yeah, it sets a baseline of exhaustion and reactivity that colors the subsequent 16 hours of your day.
But then, you encounter these incredibly profound moments in today's source material where people intentionally disrupt that machinery. You step into the world of the morning sanctuary, and suddenly that aggressive momentum just vanishes.
Which is exactly what we're going to look at today.
Right. We are looking at a psychological landscape that is fiercely protective. Our deep dive today is based on excerpts from a piece titled The Morning Sanctuary: Finding Peace Before the Day Begins. And our mission here is to explore 4 distinct real-life examples of how people carve out these moments of absolute untouchable peace before their daily routines take over.
And, the science behind why this works goes far beyond simply having a pleasant morning. We are really examining emotional regulation, cognitive preparation, and the deliberate manipulation of the nervous system.
Right, because emotional resilience is not just an innate personality trait, is it?
Not at all. It is a biological state that you can actively cultivate through environment and routine, particularly in those highly plastic, fragile early hours of the day.
So whether you are a natural-born morning person who just greets the dawn with enthusiasm, or you are someone who constantly hits the snooze button in a desperate plea for 5 more minutes, this is for you. We are going to look at how the environment we create, or even just simply observe in our first waking moments, dictates our psychological armor for the rest of the day.
It is a really logical progression we are taking to.
Yeah, our blueprint for today moves beautifully. We are starting inside the home, examining the most fundamental static morning routine. Then we will move to the protective observation of a rainy window.
And then we step outside for a walk through a sleeping city.
Right, and finally we will look at how this morning environment fundamentally alters our cognitive ability to learn and absorb information.
So we move from internal environmental control to external observation, then to physical movement, and it all culminates in cognitive application.
Let's jump right into it. Let's start with that internal control. The source text introduces this person waking up at 6:30 a.m., specifically before anyone else in the house is awake.
That timing is crucial.
Yeah, they make coffee slowly. The kitchen is entirely silent. They hear nothing but the sound of boiling water as sunlight just begins to enter the room. And for 10 minutes, they do absolutely nothing.
Just existing.
Exactly. They just sit quietly. And the text notes that even though they know their upcoming workday is going to be highly stressful, this small, seemingly uneventful moment provides a deep emotional calm.
Well, the psychological weight of that 6:30 a.m. threshold, it cannot be overstated. This is a unique pocket of time that exists entirely outside the social contract of the day.
The social contract. Unpack that for us.
Sure. So before a certain hour, depending on your lifestyle, no one expects you to reply to an email. Your family or roommates are asleep, so there are no relational demands being placed on you. You are essentially in a temporal safe zone.
Oh, I love that term. Temporal safe zone.
Right. Once the rest of the world wakes up, the social contract engages and you immediately become a worker, a parent, a partner, a citizen. But in a silent house at dawn, you are untethered from all those external obligations.
And the sensory experience of that untethered state is vividly specific in the text. The silent kitchen, the sound of the boiling water. I really want to understand the mechanism behind why that silence feels so restorative.
To understand that, we need to look at the reticular activating system, or the RAS.
Okay, what is that exactly?
It is a network of neurons located in the brainstem. Its primary job is to act as a gatekeeper for sensory information. Throughout the day, your brain is just bombarded with millions of bits of data.
Like traffic, emails, talking.
Exactly. The noise of traffic, the blaring television, the constant pinging of notifications, the visual clutter of a busy office. The RAS has to constantly filter out what is dangerous, what is important, and what is just background noise.
So it is essentially a sophisticated threat detection radar spinning constantly.
That is a highly accurate way to frame it. And running that radar takes a massive amount of metabolic energy. So by the end of the day, the RAS is completely fatigued.
Which makes sense why we feel so drained.
Exactly. But when you eliminate all of that noise, when you exist in a silent kitchen at 6:30 a.m., the brain's gatekeeper gets to power down. It can focus on a single, simple, non-threatening stimulus. In this case, the boiling water.
So the water acts as like an acoustic anchor?
Yes, it grounds the nervous system and signals to the primal parts of the brain that there are no complex variables to process. The environment is safe.
But, doing nothing is incredibly difficult for most people. We have this cultural compulsion toward constant productivity. The dynamic at play here is the intentional contrast between those 10 minutes of doing nothing and the impending reality of a stressful workday.
It is a very deliberate choice.
Right. But if the brain knows the stress is coming at 9:00 a.m., why does sitting in silence help? Doesn't the anticipation just cause more anxiety?
That is where the concept of the cortisol awakening response comes in. Cortisol is our primary stress hormone, and it naturally spikes about 30 to 45 minutes after waking to help us become alert.
Okay.
However, if you immediately jump into checking emails or reading the news the second your eyes open, you are artificially amplifying that spike. You are pulling future stressors into your present moment.
Oh, wow. So you are paying the stress tax before the bill is even due.
Precisely. By enforcing those 10 minutes of nothingness, you are actively managing that neurochemical release. You are proving to your own nervous system that you have autonomy over when the stress begins.
That is so empowering.
It really is. Furthermore, doing nothing is actually a misnomer. When you sit quietly without external distraction, you are activating the default mode network in the brain.
Which does what exactly?
It is the neural pathway associated with self-reflection, memory consolidation, and internal processing. You are actually doing highly complex psychological work by giving your brain the space to organize itself before the external world demands its attention.
Okay, let's unpack this with an analogy for the listener. Doing nothing is actually doing something. Think of a submarine preparing for a deep, challenging dive.
I like where this is going.
The crew doesn't secure the hatches and check the oxygen levels while water is violently rushing over the deck in a storm. They do the systematic checks on the surface in the calm waters of the harbor.
Right.
The ocean, the stressful workday is going to be chaotic regardless. You cannot control the pressure at depth. But this person in the silent kitchen is sealing the hatches and checking the gauges. When the chaos hits later, it has to penetrate that layer of psychological preparation they established at 6:30 a.m.
That is a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
The societal pressure to be instantly productive upon waking is just immense. The hustle culture narrative suggests that if you aren't optimizing every second, you are falling behind.
Grabbing the phone while brushing your teeth,
Yes.
right?
Listening to a high-intensity business analysis while brewing the coffee. Sitting quietly to listen to water boil is a radical, fiercely protective act of reclaiming your own time.
It is a declaration of sovereignty over your own mind before you rent it out to the demands of the world.
Exactly. And that transition from internal control to external observation, it brings us to the second scenario in the source material.
Right. We are moving away from the active creation of a sanctuary, like deliberately getting up early to make coffee in silence, to a sanctuary that is created by external weather conditions. We are shifting our focus to looking out the window on a rainy morning.
The text gives us very specific parameters here. The person is sitting near the window with a cup of tea and a blanket. They are watching cars outside moving slowly through the weather.
And they hear the soft, repetitive sound of the rain.
Yes. And crucially, they do not feel lonely. They feel peaceful and completely protected inside the room.
The text specifically prompts us to look at why rainy mornings feel extra cozy. But I want to push back on the standard interpretation here for a second.
Go.
Is it actually the rain itself that makes us feel peaceful? Or is it the stark contrast of watching those slow-moving cars and knowing deep down in our bones that we don't have to be out there navigating that mess yet?
That is an interesting distinction.
Right. I would argue that true coziness requires a contrast. You cannot feel truly warm and protected unless you are acutely aware of the cold and wet that is just inches away, separated only by a pane of glass.
Well, you're pointing to a deeply ingrained evolutionary psychology concept known as protected isolation.
Okay, tell me more about that.
Evolutionarily speaking, bad weather was a genuine life-threatening stressor. Cold, wet conditions meant a high risk of hypothermia, illness, and a lack of foraging resources. Our brains are hardwired to recognize a storm as a severe threat.
So why the feeling of peace? If our primal brain sees a storm as a threat, shouldn't we feel anxious watching it?
The coziness comes from the absolute undeniable assurance of safety in the face of a perceived threat.
Oh, I see.
When you are wrapped in a blanket with warm tea, hearing the rain against the glass, your brain is simultaneously registering the external threat, the storm, and your complete structural invulnerability to it.
Because you are inside behind the glass.
Right. You are experiencing the visual and auditory cues of danger without any of the physiological risks. This creates a massive dump of soothing neurotransmitters, primarily dopamine and serotonin. Is the ultimate feeling of being secure.
It is almost like a benign, empathetic relief. You watch the visual of those commuting cars, the people out there dealing with the wipers, the puddles, the chaotic traffic, and it heightens the internal sanctuary. It is like, I see the struggle and I am safely removed from it.
This aligns perfectly with how human beings process cognitive relief.
Huh.
The philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer suggested that happiness is often merely the absence of suffering.
Oh, that is profound.
When you watch the slow-moving cars in the rain, you are projecting the physical discomfort of that commute onto yourself and then immediately experiencing the neurological relief of not having to endure it.
So the sanctuary isn't just a physical blanket.
No, it is created by the cognitive contrast between your current state of warmth and a highly visible, less desirable alternative.
Let's dig into the auditory impact of the rain, because the text highlights the soft and repetitive sound. How does that specific sound profile affect the brain compared to, say, just a completely quiet room?
Rain is essentially a natural form of pink noise.
Pink noise. How is that different from white noise?
While white noise contains all frequencies at equal intensity, which can sometimes sound harsh or hissy, like static pink noise has more power in the lower frequencies. It sounds deeper and more soothing, like a steady rainfall or a gentle ocean wave.
Okay, that makes sense.
From a neurological standpoint, the auditory cortex processes this continuous, predictable frequency as a masking agent. It covers up the jarring, unpredictable sounds of the world. A distant siren, a dog barking, a door slamming.
And unpredictable sounds trigger the threat detection radar we talked about earlier.
Precisely. A sudden, sharp noise activates the amygdala and triggers the sympathetic nervous system, which is your fight-or-flight response.
Right.
But the repetitive, low-frequency pattern of rain signals to the brain that the environment is entirely stable. It actively triggers the parasympathetic nervous system, which physically lowers your heart rate, slows your breathing, and reduces blood pressure.
There is another layer here regarding societal expectations that I want to bring up.
Let's hear it.
A bright, sunny Saturday morning often carries an underlying pressure to seize the day. Go for a hike, be productive, mow the lawn. If you sit inside with a blanket on a beautiful day, there is often a lingering sense of sunshine guilt, a feeling that you are wasting the good weather.
Oh, absolutely. The rain fundamentally alters that social contract.
Exactly.
When it's pouring outside, the external world is essentially closed for business. The bad weather, socially and psychologically, validates the act of staying inside, resting, and doing nothing.
It provides an unquestionable excuse to seek sanctuary. The environment is giving you explicit permission to pause.
And knowing you have that permission from nature itself allows you to relax on a level that is incredibly difficult to achieve when the sun is demanding your active participation in the world.
It really is the architecture of guilt-free peace.
Well said. So we have established sanctuaries inside through deliberate silence and through external weather conditions. Now, the third example in our source material takes the concept of the sanctuary out into the physical world.
Right. It explores stepping outside for a morning walk before the crowds arrive. The text describes a person taking a walk early in the morning before the streets become crowded. They experience the cool air. They hear birds singing.
And the realization here is that the city feels softer and slower.
But the most critical part of this example is the observation that this specific environment helps them think clearly and emotionally process difficult feelings.
The phrase, "the city feels softer and slower," forces us to confront a fundamental truth about urban environments. Cities, at their core physical level, are just architecture. They're concrete, glass, steel, and asphalt. They are inherently neutral spaces.
Yet nobody describes a modern city as neutral. We always describe them as aggressive, loud, overstimulating, and chaotic.
Because we almost exclusively experience urban environments when they're saturated with human behavior. It is the crowds, the unpredictable traffic patterns, and the sheer pace of rush hour that make a city feel aggressive.
So it's not the city itself.
No, when you remove the people at 5:30 a.m., you reveal the actual physical space. Without the frenetic energy of thousands of intersecting agendas, the massive architecture becomes a quiet, expansive backdrop rather than a gauntlet you have to survive.
During a busy afternoon, walking down a city street requires constant threat detection and navigation. You are dodging pedestrians, calculating the speed of an approaching cyclist, listening for erratic cars, anticipating the changing of a crosswalk signal.
And your brain's processing power is almost entirely consumed by external survival mechanics. The cognitive load is immense.
But in that empty, early morning city,
That specific cognitive load drops to near zero. The environment is visually and physically uncluttered. Because your brain is no longer playing defense against the environment, it suddenly has the massive bandwidth required to turn inward.
I want to understand the mechanics of why this specific action moving through an empty city is so highly effective for processing a difficult emotion like grief or a complex conflict at work. Sitting still worked for the coffee drinker in our first example. Why does the magic in this third example rely on movement?
It comes down to the neurology of forward momentum and something called bilateral stimulation.
Bilateral stimulation.
Yeah, when you are walking, you are engaging in rhythmic, alternating movement of the left and right sides of your body. This physical action forces cross-hemisphere activation in the brain.
Okay, so the two halves of the brain are talking to each other.
Exactly. Communication was rapidly passed back and forth across the corpus callosum, which is the thick band of nerve fibers connecting the left and right hemispheres.
Why does cross-hemispheric communication help with a difficult feeling?
The right hemisphere of the brain is deeply involved in processing raw, intense emotion and spatial awareness. The left hemisphere is generally responsible for logic, language, and linear narrative.
Do they do different jobs?
Right. When you experience a difficult emotion or a traumatic conflict, it often gets stuck in the emotional right hemisphere. It feels overwhelming and unstructured. Bilateral stimulation, like a steady, rhythmic walk, facilitates the transfer of that raw emotional data into the left hemisphere, where it can be organized, put into words, and contextualized.
Wait, this sounds remarkably similar to specific psychological therapies.
It is the foundational mechanism behind therapies like eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, or EMDR.
Oh, wow.
The physical act of moving forward through space while processing a negative emotion actually helps the brain metabolize that emotion. It signals to the amygdala, the fear center, that you are not physically trapped by the problem. You are literally moving through it.
If you are sitting completely still in a room, fixating on a massive problem, it is very easy for the walls to feel like they are closing in. You can ruminate and spiral downward because your physical state is static.
Exactly.
But if you are walking, your physiological state is telling your brain, we are navigating this, we have agency, we are advancing.
Combine that physical forward momentum with the uncluttered, expansive environment of the sleeping city, and you have the perfect neurological conditions for emotional clarity.
You're moving, you are breathing cool air.
The sensory input is gentle, like the singing birds mentioned in the text, and there are no immediate threats demanding your attention. It allows the subconscious mind to untangle complex emotional knots that it simply could not handle during the chaotic noise of the afternoon.
Let's make this real for the listener. Picture this right now. Think of the busiest, loudest intersection in your city, the place where the buses screech, the horns are relentless, and the visual clutter is overwhelming. Now, strip all of that away. Imagine standing in the exact center of that intersection at 5:30 in the morning. The traffic lights are dutifully changing from red to green, but there are no cars. The concrete is cool. The only sound is the echo of your own footsteps against the buildings.
It is a completely different world.
The sheer scale of the buildings, without the distraction of the crowd, feels majestic. You own the space. That is the physical manifestation of a clear mind. You are experiencing the skeleton of the city and finding a space large enough to hold whatever complex emotions you need to process.
That is beautifully put. And that brings us to our fourth and final scenario, which shifts from emotional processing to cognitive mechanics.
Right. We are looking at how this peaceful morning state fundamentally alters our brain's ability to learn and absorb new information.
The source material introduces a student who wakes up early to quietly study English before class.
And the text draws a stark contrast between two states of being. It notes that at night, studying feels stressful and unproductive, but in the morning, the brain feels fresher and calmer. The crucial outcome of this example is that the student actually begins to enjoy learning more simply because the environment feels peaceful.
To understand this, we have to look closely at the biological difference between night cognition and morning cognition. At night, your brain is laboring under the accumulated weight of decision fatigue and a heavy cognitive load.
How does that load physically manifest in the brain?
Well, every single interaction you have during the day, every email you read, every micro choice about navigation, every minor frustration requires executive function.
Which happens where?
This function is primarily housed in the prefrontal cortex. You can think of the prefrontal cortex as a battery. By 8:00 p.m., after a full day of navigating the modern world, that battery is severely depleted.
You simply have less biological energy available for complex problem solving or retaining new linguistic patterns.
Exactly. And there is a chemical component to that fatigue as well.
I was going to ask about that, yeah.
Throughout your waking hours, as your cells use energy, a byproduct called adenosine steadily accumulates in your brain. Yes. Adenosine binds to specific receptors and gradually slows down neural activity, creating what we call sleep pressure. It's a chemical signal demanding that the brain shut down, consolidate memories, and initiate physical repair.
Trying to force English vocabulary into a brain that is actively being saturated with adenosine is neurologically hostile. Think of night cognition like a congested rail network at the end of a chaotic day.
That is a great visual.
The tracks are blocked, trains are backed up, and the system is actively creating to shut down for maintenance. Forcing a new subject into that system just creates more stress. The information cannot get to its destination.
That is precisely why studying at night feels inherently stressful, as the text points out. You are demanding high-level performance from a physically fatigued system.
Right.
But morning cognition is an entirely different biological landscape. During a full sleep cycle, the brain's glymphatic system flushes out the accumulated adenosine.
So the battery's recharged.
The prefrontal cortex battery is fully recharged. And as we discussed with the morning coffee example, your cortisol levels are naturally rising to provide a clean, unburdened alertness.
Going back to the rail network analogy, it is completely clear. The tracks are open, information can travel smoothly without resistance.
Perfectly stated.
But, the most profound insight from this fourth example isn't just about memory retention or the mechanics of learning. The text states that the student begins to enjoy learning more because the environment feels peaceful.
We constantly make the mistake of separating a task from the environment in which it is performed.
Oh, we do this all the time.
We conclude studying is a miserable experience, therefore I hate studying. But what this student discovered is that they didn't hate the English language. They hated the physiological state of being exhausted and stressed while trying to process complex information.
By moving the exact same task into the morning sanctuary, the peacefulness of the quiet dawn transferred onto the task itself. The environment generated a sense of joy and ease in a process that was previously dreaded.
This is a remarkable demonstration of how context dictates perception. If you pair a high cognitive demand task with a low-stress, highly supportive environment, you change your fundamental relationship to the effort.
Think about the dreaded tasks in your own life. Reconciling a complicated budget, writing a difficult performance review, or organizing a chaotic schedule.
We all have them.
We typically procrastinate on these tasks. We push them to the very end of the day, whereas loom over us, and then we try to tackle them when our prefrontal cortex is depleted and our adenosine levels are peaking.
Which guarantees that the task will be miserable.
And that just reinforces our hatred of doing it.
It becomes a punishing, self-fulfilling prophecy. You are ensuring failure, or at least maximum friction, by choosing the worst possible biological moment to attempt the work.
But if we apply the lesson of the morning sanctuary to this, what happens? What if you take that difficult budget or that complex writing task and you pair it with the silent kitchen, the 6:30 a.m. coffee, and the untouched dawn?
You rebrand the concept of doing the hard work. It is no longer a punishment at the end of a long day. It is an act of grace.
An act of grace. I love that.
You are gifting yourself the easiest, most peaceful, most biologically optimized conditions in which to execute the challenge. You wake up, experience the peace of the temporal safe zone, accomplish the complex task with relative ease, and then the rest of your day is completely unburdened by the dread of procrastination.
Your emotional resilience for the remaining hours is exponentially higher because the heavy lifting was done in a state of sanctuary.
Exactly.
Looking at the continuous thread running through all four of these diverse scenarios, a very clear definition emerges for me. Sanctuary is not a physical destination. It isn't a luxury spa or a remote cabin in the woods or a vacation resort that you have to purchase access to.
No, not at all.
Sanctuary is a highly intentional manipulation of time and environment.
The magic in all of these source examples relies entirely on free, accessible resources. Silence, sensory awareness, the predictable rhythm of rain, the physical movement of a morning walk,
Things anyone can access.
and the unique, irreplaceable temporal space of the early morning before the social contract engages. It is about recognizing that the way you enter the day dictates the terms of engagement for the rest of it.
We have immense power over our baseline emotional state simply by fiercely guarding those first few moments of consciousness. But it requires the discipline to not immediately plug into the chaos.
Which is hard.
It is. To let the water boil in silence, to watch the rain instead of a screen, to walk the empty street and let the mind organize itself.
It is the vital discipline of protecting your own psychological peace before the world demands your attention.
As we wrap up this deep dive into the source material, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over long after this audio stops. We have explored the profound biological and psychological power of the dawn and how that untouched morning hour functions as a shield.
A very effective shield.
But if sanctuary is truly just an intentional state of mind combined with a curated environment, is it possible to manufacture this morning feeling at 2:00 p.m. in the middle of a chaotic office? That is a fascinating question.
Right. Can you hack your environment with noise-canceling headphones, a deliberate pause, and a cup of tea to recreate that 6:30 a.m. magic in the middle of a Tuesday slump? Or is there an irreplaceable biological, almost spiritual magic that only exists in those fragile moments before the rest of the world wakes up?
It is definitely something to ponder.
It is something to consider the next time you set your alarm. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, guard your mornings.